My name is Carl Quill, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today, we're talking with Shifaz Sikkander of Stone Lion Games. Shifaz shares how he grew up being obsessed with founding a company that made an impact on the world, and how that ended up shaping his career, including the leap into entrepreneurship. While he was initially not targeting games, both his love of games and seeing an opportunity in the space really pushed him in that direction. Let's jump in.
So where I normally start out is there's usually a moment where, you've been thinking about starting a company. You think that maybe this is what you want to do. Maybe you want to make a game. Maybe you have an idea for the studio you actually want to make. But at some point it becomes real, right? Like it's, emotionally and mentally, you're doing this. It's not you're thinking about doing this. You are doing it. And I'm curious for you, can you talk about sort of what led up to that moment and what sort of tipped you over into, oh no, this is happening?
Yeah, to be honest, it really started from childhood, right? Like I was probably 10 years old. I kind of saw Steve Jobs' documentary. I was totally mesmerized by the type of personality he had, his entire life history. I watched it like documentary after documentary. It was crazy. Then I kind of jumped into like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Richard Branson, all of them. Any documentary I could find on YouTube, I've seen it on these billionaires and tech startups, and then like Silicon Valley pirates, whatnot. And then I think like when I was in kind of grade 8, I kind of stumbled across Shark Tank. And then I just really loved watching those pitches. And I felt like as a kid, I could really read what those investors are going to say, right? They were like, okay, is it patent protected? What is my ROI? And learning those kind of key terms, I could feel how a presentation is going to go as soon as I started watching them present, right? And as a kid, I kind of always knew startups were something I was going to do for sure. And then as I kind of matured, I realized, you can do brick and mortar, go product, but as like, SaaS, software as a service is probably your biggest bet. But then I also felt, there's a lot of great products in the market, but majority are going to fail. It almost felt like a lottery system, but I kind of knew like, software as a service is probably my biggest bet. Also, like, being inspired by Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, I was naturally geared towards it. Always loved programming. The only thing is that I went to chemical engineering instead of computer engineering. And looking back, I really don't know why I made that decision. But I was able to learn programming on my own, so I felt like I was kind of hedging my risk in that sense.
Mhm.
And essentially, what happened was I graduated, and took some time off instead of going straight into work. And I was experimenting with different like startup ideas. I tried to make a calendar app, kind of compete with Google Calendar, whatnot. Didn't really work out, even though I had a working prototype. And then it was kind of time to get a job. So while I was working, I was kind of just thinking what my next idea would be, right? And
Right.
nothing there was no like product in terms of software as a service that really stood out to me. Like I didn't have an Uber as an idea or whatever, right? But then when I looked at gaming, I just felt it was so bland, right? There was Clash of Clans that was really popular back in like 2012, 2016. But after that, I really couldn't tell what was the mobile game that stuck with the entire generation. So I felt like mobile gaming was an opportunity to kind of show something different, bring a lot of value proposition. So I was like, you know what, let me try to build a game on my own. And then, I didn't get super far in terms of something I was really impressed with. So then I kind of expanded the team, and then we created a bunch of original game mechanics, right? And then I felt like we had a motor for ourselves, right? A real business. And then it was just once you had a working prototype, it was time to pull the trigger where I left my job and, we were official business.
For sure. Games are not anywhere close to B2B SaaS, the classic
Yeah,
entrepreneur journey. So
yeah,
like, I'm curious,
yeah,
it sounds like
yeah,
you played games,
yeah, yeah.
prior, and like games like Clash of Clans left impression on you. what was the genesis of the like? Well, B2B SaaS seems like how all these billionaires made this their money, but games over here are just funds.
You know what? I think it was a little bit naiveness when I was like 20 years old. I didn't know that like B2B was where all the money was at, right? I just
Mhm,
I just saw the Ubers and like eBay or whatever. I was like, those are pretty much B2C, right? And that was just like, and also B2B just seemed kind of boring to me as a, young adult. And I wanted something that was just like the masses would be a fan of, right? People on the street is gonna stop me and be like, "I love this game" or "I love this product," you know. Whereas B2Bs didn't have the same appeal to me. So, and then only when I started pitching and started going to these startup conferences, where I saw like, man, 90% of these founders are B2B, and obviously the math makes sense, right?
mhm.
So, yeah, I think it was just kind of like a coincidence.
So once you like you sort of had this journey where you decided to work on games, you were working more as a solo developer.
Yeah,
You ended up not getting very far as a solo developer in games because games are like it's not that it's impossible to do them solo, but
yeah,
I find that games often are a team sport,
yeah.
and so you sort of work to build out that team. You get something moving, and suddenly you're like, it sounds like you're like, "Oops, I have a company," right?
Yeah, almost.
And so, for when you sort of realize, okay, cool, we've done the thing of we've built fast, we have something that feels like it's moving. Oh, I have a company now. What did you have to like realize? Oh, this is now I have to figure out all these things about this business that I'm suddenly in.
Yeah, and the reason, like, I needed a team was because I wasn't trying to just make a simple 5-day project or a 5-month project. Like, it needed to be fleshed out, right? I needed to know back end, needed to know graphics, like all sorts of things, right? So I needed the full package, and I was in a one-man team that was going to get it done. And, once I had a full team and we had a polished prototype, it was learning how to become incorporated, right? How to have those conversations around equity splits, employee benefits, HSA, like, health service spending account or something, and all this employee benefits fees. It was like such a huge headache. And I was like, I just knew those terms. I didn't know how those were actually structured. No one really talks about it. And, ChatGPT wasn't around back then. So it was kind of like always this dead ends, and I had to go to like a really good lawyer. It was a huge learning experience. So that was like the first piece, all the legal aspect of becoming incorporated and making sure you protect your business. But the second piece was pitching to investors, right? I really thought I could hammer out a really solid pitch deck within a week, and that would take me all the way. And but once I started presenting my pitch deck to actual investors and then getting feedback from established founders, yourself included, that's when I kind of really realized it's a very iterative process, right?
Yeah, it's definitely uh I'm sure there are people who can bang out a pitch deck in a week, but I have not met that mythical human.
Yeah. And to be honest, you just meet so many different people with all different kind of things they're looking for. And if you're a responsible entrepreneur, you're just going to keep adapting and adding slides to your appendix, just keep growing, right?
Yeah. When you look back at sort of how you got from, I don't want to say like the childlike dream of I want to be an entrepreneur, but
Yeah,
that sort of like, oh, watching Shark Tank, oh, seeing these big apps. I want to, be the founder that takes one of those there
yeah,
to, oh, okay, I actually have a business and I'm figuring all this out and what it actually means to have a business, not just like dream of being an entrepreneur.
yeah,
What's sort of the biggest learning that you'd go back and tell someone who's has those big eyes, go back to yourself,
yeah, yeah,
coming out of college, dreaming of being
yeah,
an entrepreneur.
yeah.
What is the big learning that you'd be like, hey, like here's the thing you need to know.
If they made a time machine, I would be the first person in line, man. And to be honest, it's like my biggest mistake was that I didn't build in public and get to revenue as soon as possible. Right? And I think that childlike mentality in me was just an overconfidence in my ability to get things done, right? In my experience, like getting a job, no matter how amazing or brutal the market condition was never a problem. And I kind of translated that to, okay, getting a funding, for my startup would be no different, right? I don't care other studios are not getting a dollar right now. I know I'm special. I know what my company can do. The idea behind it is solid. I was so confident that would be an easy check to get, right? Um, However, learned the hard way that the market condition, especially in mobile gaming, is really rough, right? So to be bulletproof, no matter what market condition you're in, getting revenue is really important. I know startups that are having like 10K in recurring revenue per month, and they're not getting funding, which is ridiculous, right? So that's one piece. The other piece is experimenting with social media very early on. These algorithms are quite unforgiving, right? And each platform is vastly different. I think as someone starting out, you're going to like try to diversify and try every single different platform, maybe even try to apply the same strategy on each, and you're pretty much going to fall in your face, right? Each platform needs a specialized strategy, and you probably want to find your SME to kind of help you build traction early on. We kind of discussed the pitch deck process, right? It being really iterative. But the other piece is getting your data room ready very early on, right? Because once you start making your game design document, you're making your financial models, your marketing plan, market analysis, and tech stack. Once you sort those things out, you pretty much find holes in your business plan, right? And you're kind of like teaching yourself about your business by even doing those exercises in a sense. So that's something I really recommend to anyone.
For sure. I think I mean all of those are absolutely solid points of advice of like the practicalities of getting a business up and running and sort of the realities of doing a startup. I
Yeah,
think looking back, you know, from your perspective of having that drive, I think, to start something,
yeah,
but not necessarily having a clear like direction. I think there's a very classic like I want to be a founder, and so to your point, like maybe I'll do it. Like I have this idea of like this is going to sound stupid, but like it's sort of the thing that I think people end up in this thing of like, oh, I'll make Uber for calendars, or I'll
yeah,
make Airbnb for insert thing here,
yeah,
right? Like, and
yeah,
they try a bunch of founding things, right? And I think there's a journey that people go on as they're doing that to just sort of like that creative drive, that creative slash entrepreneurial drive is pushing them to do stuff. And then there's sort of the difference between that effort and sort of the gear shift of like, oh, now I'm locked in on I am
yeah,
making this game in this business, right? Like it's not I am making an entrepreneurial journey in abstract. It's I'm doing this one.
yeah.
Is there anything in that sort of like realization and like shifting into that mindset that you're like, oh, for those people who are just stuck in that sort of like wide open entrepreneurial space, like here's the thing you need to know about what happens when you go from maybe I'll do Airbnb for Google Calendar to I'm locked into an idea that I have a real passion about.
And for me, I felt like I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I really don't have an answer because it's been so far from my experience, right? I've always been able to make that transition. I knew like part of my life's journey would be to have a real startup, right? So it's not something I kind of combat with, or I don't think I'll be able to provide the insight to kind of help someone go through that journey. However, what I will say was like in my experience, I felt like I'm always kind of in the dark with a small torch trying to find my path, right? And I think for me, it's like very important not to lose that flame because I have a whole team that's looking to get funded and go to market, right? So I carry a lot of weight and responsibilities for not just myself. So I think when I left my job to pursue funding full time, that's when it became very real for me, right? And all these
Mhm.
things of just like, okay, just have a big dream. I kind of want to live that cool life of being an entrepreneur, create this amazing product for the world to be like obsessed over. Once I quit my job, it felt very real, So I think when you kind of put yourself in a position where it's like do or die, you'll kind of figure everything out.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something of like I think the classic business analogy is burn the ships behind you, so you have to like you're forced to figure it out from there. So as you built up this team and you sort of have gone on this journey, did you end up picking up what you would consider like a peer co-founder, or would you consider yourself more of a solo founder in this regard?
We're a little bit from the gray space, right? Where because I funded majority of the development out of pocket, right? So they're technically co-founders. It just depends on everyone's strict definition of it, right? So on my team, I have a lead developer, a lead 3D artist, and a lead 2D artist. And we
Mhm.
specialize as an anime studio, right? So most of our skill set revolves around rendering and having like 3D environments appear 2D. So you can kind of have that anime artist art style.
Cool. And so it sounds like really that sort of co-founder group was really came together just on the, oh, well, I need to put together this team. And so it was just, well, here's the developer that I like working with, here's the artist I like working with, right? Like, and it sort of coalesced around that skill set.
It came around addressing my largest gap at the time, right? So my biggest roadblock at the beginning was I couldn't make a game like inside out. Like my programming background wasn't in games. I kind of had to learn Unity, even though I knew C sharp. It's a totally different like game, right? In the Unity game engine. So yeah, so I needed a lead developer. Once we had that, our prototype, just using free assets, it didn't really look so great. But then we also knew we wanted to like have a really amazing anime game.
Mhm.
So finding that specialized skill set was what we had to kind of add to the team.
What were the big conversations that you had to have? I think especially like, along the way as you're sort of building this out and it's more like, hey, you're trying to figure out the map, it feels very practical, right? Like I need to figure out Unity, so therefore I need a Unity developer. Let me go find one and hire one, right? And like that sort of like find that person is a pretty, well trodden space of like how to generally interview for someone you're going to just do work with, right?
Yeah.
But as it shifts to, oh no, this is a real business, and we're talking about incorporating, and we're talking about equity, and we're talking about all these things, what were the big conversations you had to have as a team as it became that more real thing, that transition? Like what big conversations do you have to sit down and have that really turned it from, hey, we're some folks working on a game to, hey, we're now a startup doing this thing?
Yeah, and I think for us, something that played to my advantage is everything started so small, like almost in a very small bubble. So it's essentially like, okay, I kind of like your personality. I feel like you have high integrity, you really care about your work. I can see even like you might have a full-time job somewhere else, but anything that you're working on as a side project is really high quality, polished out, right? Or if they're an artist, they're just crunching out like mad hours, mad amount of artwork that's looks amazing. So kind of like I got a good assessment on people's characters before they joined the team. So then we would work on a small project, like maybe you want to flesh out the prototype or build a new feature, right? We kind of do that over the span of 3 months, and we kind of get a crash course of learning each other, right? How do we problem solve? How do we address conflicts? And all sorts of things, right? So kind of we already had a lot of experience working together by the time we became incorporated. So by the time we became incorporated, the big conversations revolved around, okay, do you believe in the startup? Do you believe in the vision? Do you understand what the pitfalls in the mobile market are right now, right? Because we're not just trying to make another mobile game and spend a lot of money on user acquisition. We're building a lot of moats, a lot of value proposition. So do they see the vision, right? Why we're going to scale to $1 billion company? And they obviously knew that we were trying to build something different from the get-go, because that's how we approached it. So that was a very easy piece. And then they also understood, because like as I was going through the learning process with my lawyers of becoming incorporated, everything I learned, I run to them. I was like, hey, did you know this is how a safe safe works, a convertible note works, and then post money, pre money. So I was teaching them as I was going through the entire process.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty much the only business minded person on the team currently, right? So as I was showing them, like, this is the math, this is how things actually pan out, they just addressed their concerns to me, really. And they were kind of like set on following me on this journey from day one, essentially. I don't know if that answered your question, but there weren't a lot of big conversations to be had.
For sure. Out of curiosity, I think you came into this as more of a, business minded person. Obviously, you have the engineering background, both chemical and self taught computer engineering. and really we're looking at a wide range. Like you weren't, a games specialist per se, right? The background I imagine of folks who that you got on more of the development side are a little bit more
Of
specialized.
course,
But
yes.
are these folks who are, sort of early in their career journey, have a lot of experience in games, or like where did they land on that spectrum? And how much do you find that helps inform your own journey since you don't necessarily have a decades long
Yeah,
experience in
yeah,
games,
yeah.
right?
So when I connected with my lead developer, we were both a little bit young in our journey, right? But since we were working on it for the past 5 years, pretty much we've kind of grown in seniority. So my lead developer has worked on multiple mobile titles, which generates like multiple seven-figure revenue kind of thing, right? So
Mhm.
then my lead 3D artist has about 10 years of experience in 3D art, specializes in making custom shaders. And then our lead 2D artist specializes in anime character creation. She's worked on some of the largest anime studios as a freelancer. So it kind of, the team grew in seniority because I hired people that had more experience with me. So while we were kind of like a young team in terms of like compared to other startups in the gaming
Mhm.
space, we have the right amount, right? And we're also coming in with the fresh eyes. So we're not following the current game plan, right? We're building our own roadmap and validating it with market data.
It sounds like, when it comes to the development side, right? Like you all have a pretty collaborative environment, right? Like you
Yeah,
all bring different expertises. You all have the same vision of a big, you know, mass market mobile title that you want to go off and build. And so I imagine that from a development side of things, it tends to be a bit more of a collaborative decision making process. Disagreements probably don't come up too
yeah,
frequently, and they're kind of hashed out relatively straightforwardly.
yeah.
When it comes to that versus the business, is there a big tonal difference or method difference in how you guys deal with not even disagreements specific, but just like making decisions when it comes to the broader business?
Yeah, and the thing is like when I was building my own startup, I've worked at multiple, Fortune 500 companies, let's say, right? And I've kind of seen a lot of different work environments, and I knew that my startup had to have a very special work culture, right? I've seen a lot of billion-dollar companies that could be even larger kind of fail just because of a lot of ego, poor management, not listening to the SMEs. So I didn't want that at my own startup, right? So essentially, like there's a extensive vetting process before anyone joins our team, and I have a really good judge of character. So essentially, we're looking for people with zero ego and a problem-solving mentality, right? So whenever we have a problem, be it technical or business related, we kind of just break it down to first principles, and then we brainstorm of potential solutions, and we pick the fastest route to getting to where we need to be while managing our tech debt. So we have like a very streamlined, simple approach to addressing all problems, regardless of the nature, right?
Mhm.
And to be honest, we never had any heated conversations, even though we might disagree in like approaches. We just kind of keep discussing until we find an approach, right? No one really cares who had the right answer, right? It
For
just
sure.
matters about did we get the result that we needed.
So you've talked a little bit about funding a couple times, both going out and pitching and learning about safes and convertible notes from your lawyer,
Yeah,
and sort of paying out of pocket and bootstrapping for the initial development.
yeah.
Tell us a bit about like how you've been funded over the course of your journey and whatever detail you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so initially when we started out, what we were looking for, like I thought, I get my pitch deck that I hammered out in a week like a crazy person.
Uh-huh.
And then I sent a bunch of cold emails and I consider that low effort, right? Because I was just trying to test the water. And, to my surprise, or not surprise, I guess, due to overconfidence, within a few weeks, I had a few investor meetings lined up. So I was like, okay, this is going to be like smooth sailing, just like I predicted, right? And then I got into those investor meetings and I thought I was going to get my first check out of my first meeting. And that's when I kind of realized, wow, there's so many different types of investors, right? Some people are taking meetings for the sake of taking meetings, or some people have a total different mentality, right? Some are totally like driven just by the story. Some want like to know all about the game mechanics, other want to know back end. You just see all sorts of different people, right? So I thought it was going to be smooth sailing since I got my first investor meetings quite easily just through cold emails. And then, kind of following that experience for a few months, we kind of realized we need to have a higher volume of investor meetings. And the best way to get that done is to have an advisor who's very well connected that could set up those warm introductions. And that's kind of like the path that we're following on right now.
What's we sort of talked about this, but now that once you got past the sort of like perhaps overly optimistic view that
Yeah.
everything would be smooth sailing, your first VC meeting would result in a check, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you watch Shark Tank, that's if you knock it out of the park, your first meeting with four VCs results in a check, right? What's the biggest difference since that sort of initial realization between how you thought it would go and what's actually happened since then?
Yeah, I think like pitching to just founders that have had raised capital showed me a lot of holes in my business plan and even in the pitch deck, right? And now just iterating like time after time, I think I'm like on revision 12 or something, right? Now when I present and pitch, I'm flooded with compliments, right? They say this is the most well thought out pitch deck they've seen in a while. They say you're like amazing at pitching, blah, 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 right? So I feel like I've kind of gotten over that hurdle or maybe any insecurity I've had around that. But now I feel like my biggest learning is that when you're pitching, it's not like a logical case or business case you're doing, right? You just don't want to show this is all your financials, this is how you're going to address your TAM, whatnot. You want to sell with emotion, right? You want to kind of make them feel greedy almost. They want them salivating over your business idea because they see the market potential and they're not going to have any fear, right? Selling with emotion was the biggest hurdle that I had just because I don't feel like I was an emotional person. I've always seen myself as a very pragmatic, logical person. And, just talking to a lot of founders, the message or never really registered with me until I watched TED Talk or keynote by Vinod Khosla. And what he was saying is that humans make decisions that are emotion based.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had to pause and I was like, have I ever made a decision that was emotion based? And then if I was really honest with myself, there are decisions that I've made in life where I even surprised myself, right? But I always rationalize the decisions after the fact. And I always kind of like, oh, I'm a very logical person. Any person would do that, right? So I think that was the biggest hurdle and biggest thing that I kind of have to shift in mindset when I was pitching. And yeah, I think like it was a very key moment for me.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to, in retrospect, be like, oh no, super logical all the time. Like,
Yeah.
look at all these things I must have seen in that moment to make that
Yeah.
logical decision. And
Yeah.
it's realizing that we are irrational beings that are very good at rationalizations.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't say it better myself.
As you've gone on this journey with fundraising and sort of learning how to switch gears and learning how to iterate and approach your pitch to the point where you've gotten it to. What's been sort of for you individually? What's been the hardest part of that journey? Right, like what's been the biggest struggle for you going on the fundraising journey?
I think it's just making it through those lull periods, right? Because in our experience, it's like these investor meetings came in bursts, right? And they're usually followed by like either we made a huge pivot in our strategy or we made a huge pivot in our prototype. And then we kind of did like a different email blast strategy, or we kind of found a channel to get a lot more investor meetings. And they came in bursts, but during those 3 months in between those bursts, it was kind of like just kind of telling yourself, okay, just keep working, that burst will come again, right? It was just like, people say running a startup is like staring to an abyss and chewing glass or whatever, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of just keeping that feeling at bay and just kind of keeping your head down and keep working and believing. I think just not letting that get to you. I think even that, though, to be honest, was not a big challenge. I'm kind of good at just muting that part of my brain and just working. I think for me, what I struggled with was keeping a balanced life, right?
Mm.
I don't have any problem working 12, 14 hours a day. I could actually work 24 hours without any food or water. I don't have any problem with that, right? But it's like, would I go to the gym at least once a day, right? Will I cook all my meals on time? Those are like keeping that part of my life sustained, or making time for my family, friends. That is the piece. You kind of, even though your startup is the most important thing in your life, as a founder, you still need like a small amount of balance.
And I mean, I think I often advocate with founders to think about it as balance in motion, not balance in stillness, right? Like
Yeah.
it isn't ever going to be a set amount of work and a set amount of life you need every day, right? It's gonna ebb and flow. And to your point, there are going to be days where there's a big push, there's something you're super excited about. Suddenly you realize it's been 12 hours, you haven't moved from your chair, you haven't refilled your water in a while, and you're just going. And then there are going to be days where you're like, nope, I need to go to the gym and walk in the park and maybe only work a couple hours today, right? Like, and it's going to change on a day-to-day basis. When you think about sort of the mental and emotional support for yourself as you go on this journey, right? Like a founding journey is rigorous and can be a bit lonely at times, and it's certainly dealing with a lot of ups and downs. And to your story earlier, fits and starts of what feels like progress and feels like traction. How do you support yourself on that journey as an individual? Like, what do you do to keep yourself from falling into that place where you're staring into the abyss, right?
Yeah. And I think for me personally, it was just progress, right? As long as I had a new idea or I was getting work done, that would keep me at bay and just keep chugging along, no problem. And then, it's just that if it's like too many days, I'm not feeling very stable, I feel like I'm going to snap at any moment, I'm becoming irritable. I think I usually just meditate. And, if like something is not working for 2 weeks, that just means it's time to pivot, right? And once I come up with a really good pivot, that kind of buys me like a good month or two, right?
Mhm.
And I usually have some level of success by then to kind of keep me going for the next 2 months. So it's just like really progress, meditating. But I think in terms of like support, in terms of like, mental health and stuff like that, I think I wish I had a larger network of like, entrepreneurs, right? People that have been through it. So my circle is relatively small, especially in Toronto. You don't hear of a lot of entrepreneurs. The circle is very small, very niche, usually B2B,
Mhm.
right? So when you talk to them about gaming, there's like, why would anyone spend $1 in games, right? They don't understand that people love games. So it's difficult to find people that relate. People might have a better time in like a city like Montreal where the gaming scene is a little larger, right? But I think getting an advisor who's gone through the startup journey was a huge game changer for me, right? They kind of stepping in the role of a mentor a little bit, just kind of like getting to kind of show that like or tell me that my ideas are on the right track, right? Having that second opinion sometimes does go a long way. And for a long time during my journey, there was no one telling me like, yeah, you're on the right path or this is going to work. I was just kind of had to like take a shot in the blind and kind of see where it landed and go from there.
Yeah, I think finding, whether they're official advisors slash mentors for your studio, or if they're just, personal folks that you can call in your network that advise you as a human, right? I think finding that sort of support can be really critical. Is there any area of that sort of like founder life that you feel like there's a gap you haven't quite figured out how to support yourself through, that you're like, oh man, I need to figure out how to solve this for myself?
To be honest, no, it's just not my experience, right? I feel like I'm very low maintenance. It's just how I've been as a child. Even like, yeah, to be honest, I really don't have an answer to that question, right? I think for me, as long as I have progress and I'm doing the best I can for that day, it really keeps me in a good place. Right, and I think there's obviously business challenges, right? There's still a lot that I've yet to encounter, and I kind
Hmm.
of just like I kind of do extrapolations. I'm like, let's say, I get my next series by this day, right? And I
Hmm.
kind of develop these things for my product plan. What kind of challenges will I encounter? And I just try to like look for gaps in the business plan. So I think just having like getting to that stage, I'm kind of worried, like, will I have the right support system at those stages, right? Because any challenge that I'm having right now is going to be minuscule in terms of like once you're ready for a Series Z, for example, right? So,
Yeah, for sure. Once you get through the whole alphabet. And I always like to imagine one day a company will get through the whole alphabet and then do a Series AA. We'll go
I'm sure
full
we'll
on
get there.
Excel spreadsheet.
For sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, that'd be someone.
Exactly. Yeah, probably Uber. So when you look on the horizon, right? Like,
Mm,
6 months, a year
yeah.
for both yourself as a founder and like the journey that you're on as an individual, but a lot of that is tied up in the company that you're building as well. What are you thinking a lot about, right? Like not quite like keeping you up at night kind of vibes, more just like what are you preparing yourself for? What are you trying to stay on your toes for, right?
Yeah, and I think like, the biggest lesson that I learned like very early into my startup journey was that market conditions are going to change,
Mhm.
right? So like, everyone thought like maybe the US market would improve by now. And, it's just kind of like in a very gray area, let's say. So right now, like what I'm really interested in, I spent a lot of time thinking just in terms of like extrapolating my business is going to be, is just like once we do go to market, right? I'm just kind of curious to see what kind of what shifts might happen, right? Will there be competitors try to make a clone? Will other people adopt the technology that we're using? And I think like we're bringing a lot to the table. Like we're kind of revisiting monetization, rendering, how games are being developed for mobile. So when we look at that, I think that we will kind of inspire a lot of competition, right? And our hopes is that we kind of net very positive on our first investment round and kind of spark other investors to kind of also be more bullish in the gaming space, especially mobile.
Mhm.
So I'm just really interested in seeing what kind of competition will arise in the mobile space, especially in the next 5 years.
I think mobile is definitely with the Dream sort of it's not exactly an acquisition, but with Dreams, basically exiting all their early investors in quite a favorable fashion. I think there's definitely been a return to looking at mobile investment. I usually like to sort of wrap up the main part of the interview with an entirely unfair question, which I actually think will be an entirely easy question for you, given your sort of story into it.
Yeah,
But generally, the unfair question is, given your experience thus far, would you ever start another company if the one that you're at right now would close
yeah,
down for whatever reason,
yeah,
or you would
yeah.
exit it for whatever reason?
Yeah. And I think like I've been thinking about this more lately. And I was kind of like, I did have a really good career before I gave it up, right? And
Hmm.
I was like, I could have gone really, really far. And I was like, was I comfortable with that, right? And I was like, you kind of just think to yourself. And well, I like to think maybe the answer to that question is like, yeah, maybe I'll be comfortable not doing a startup. The reality is like, it's no, right? Because I recently saw a LinkedIn post of Scale AI getting acquired like partially by Facebook or whatnot. And that just like got my blood boiling. I was just like, that is the coolest thing ever, right? Or I can't really watch anime like as a time killer because as soon as I see something that's just mesmerizing, I'm like, I need to create something of that caliber, right?
Hmm.
Any story of a startup doing well just inspires me, or seeing any business evolve over time just inspires me. So it'll be something that's very difficult to escape. So even if I decide to take some time off, it'll be a matter of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I think you're one of the first guests we had. Like, there's a lot of guests I've had on who have sort of been a serial entrepreneur in a lot of ways, even from being a kid, right? Like, I think there is definitely you can see that in kids a lot. Like I
Yeah,
myself, like hilariously, I ran a cookie business when I was in
yeah,
in, in school. But I think for someone who really has that spark that you mentioned of like, I know that you started with documentaries, which is very high minded, but I
yeah.
keep coming back to the Shark Tank thing, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I think the generation, there's a whole generation of folks now who have been exposed to things like Shark Tank and just sort of like this iteration of Silicon Valley and that kind of stuff. And so I do think that someone coming up through that is very prime to potentially be a serial entrepreneur, whether they like it or not. So
And you know what, like once you do start your own startup, you realize it's a very painful process, right?
yes,
You only see the glam and wonderful life on Instagram or LinkedIn, right? And the early days when things don't go your way, it can be brutal, especially when you have a
yep.
team relying on you. It's a little bit of an acquired taste, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's an acquired taste, and I think people can get that taste very early on, right? To your point, right? Like it's very glamorous once the power law has been applied, but when the power law is being applied to you, it is perhaps less glamorous.
For sure.
So the way you actually are a guest who has listened to the podcast before, which I deeply appreciate. And I deeply appreciate anyone listening to this podcast. The way I finish up our interview is with the introspection lightning round, which is a series of questions that I used when I was doing co-founder dating. They're a good way to just sort of get an understanding of sort of the foundation of how someone views the world and what they're good at and how you might end up becoming a good team of co-founders down the road. And so we're just going to go through them very quick and hear your answers. The first one being, what is your superpower?
It's people leadership, right? So I used to work at a pharma company where I used to manage a team of 140 people, and I've seen every type of human being you could possibly see, right? And I've encountered all sorts of unusual problems you'd think you'd never see in a completely established business, right? So people leadership, learning how to make decisions, learning how to make trades between user experience, business needs, and the engineering side. So it's my greatest skill set is the people leadership side of things.
Outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
One of my biggest strengths, it's my biggest strengths will be problem solving, analytical data analysis, right? I just really love looking at a problem, breaking it down to its first principles, right? And then just doing a bunch of research if needed. So recently kind of needed to put together a document that kind of shows our story line for the game, right? And I'm not a writer. I can write really well. I can write really good essays, but I've never written a story, right?
Mhm.
And the ask wasn't just write a story. You could just get that done in ChatGPT these days, right? But it needed to be a really good story that showed there's potential for an IP that can grow over 10 years, right? So I'm sitting there researching, okay, how do you write a game story document? How do people write mangas? How do people write stories, create characters, hero's journey? And I'm kind of just doing a crash course, right, for myself, just figuring out like, how was it done? Then I look for like, how do people fail at doing this thing? Watching a bunch of SMEs, experts do talks, whatnot, and then I kind of just say, okay, this is my first step, second step, kind of build my outline, and then I just kind of like put something to paper and I keep iterating until it improves. So I think like even since childhood, like just problem solving has been my greatest strength, and I just acquire any skill that I need to kind of get things done.
On the flip side, what are your big weaknesses?
Yeah, right now my biggest weakness will definitely be the search engine optimization piece, right? Building traction on social media is like we've experimented in a good number of ways on multiple platforms, and we encounter different like unexpected hurdles. And right now we're looking to leverage like our team's existing personal audience base to kind of use as a launchpad. But I was just really interested in seeing could we do it from scratch, right? Because you see these people kind of just do rage bait content and get like millions of views. And like, post pandemic, the algorithm really shifted. So it's kind of interesting. I do have like a portion of knowledge gap in that piece.
When you're really stressed, how does your behaviors change? Like, what are your behavioral stress reactions?
It depends on how stressed I am. If I'm stressed and alone, I'm a happy camper, right? But if
Okay.
I'm stressed and surrounded by people, I become very irritable. Like
Mhm.
I never lose my temper. I never say anything mean, but like internally, I'll be want to pull my hair, especially if like decisions are getting made that are not to the benefit of our goal. So for me, it's like, But of course, within the startup space, it's just like my team that I love with my entire heart. They can do no wrong. So there, the only stress that I ever encounter is just about like, are we going to like keep our shop alive for the next 6 months, right? So those stress is like very manageable for me, right? It might be the outside stress in my like day to day outside of the startup where I might get a little bit more to like, agitated.
And the last question we actually kind of already talked about a little bit earlier. The question being like, what do you need to have happen professionally on an ongoing basis to sort of be able to keep that steady emotional state, to not get stressed? Like,
Yeah,
what do you need for sort of upkeep that
yeah,
maintains you? And earlier you talked about progress. Is that
yeah.
sort of the answer you would put in here, or do you have
Yeah,
another
but
answer?
you know what? Also, like, as we were doing this podcast, something that came to me that another thing to progress would be just learning, right? I just really enjoy learning more about business and then sharing that with the team, right? So even if things don't always go our way, I know there's always a key lesson that I take away, and we use that to pivot. And I kind of go to my team with a bright eyes. I'm like, listen, we didn't get this one, but look what I learned. This is why, how other companies do it. And this is what we should do. This is like, something we should try different to stand out. So even just progress, but also learning, I
Mhm.
think that's something that keeps us alive.
Well, thank you so much for being on Founders Quest. Really appreciated our conversation. If someone listening heard something that they want to follow up on, network with you, connect, or ask you questions, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. My name is Shifaz Sikkander. I always love connecting with new people, seeing what they're working on, and helping out if I ever can. So love networking through LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being on. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me on, Carl. It's really nice to see you and get to catch up again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founder support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.